What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video I'm going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from UFC 275. This is a great card with some really complex matchups for us to dig into, and I hope you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. And if you'd like to watch breakdown videos for all the other fights on this card, all of the prelim matchups, head on over to my website MMABettingTips.com. You can see it in the background here. You'll also find a link to it in the description below. On there you'll find breakdown videos for every fight, like I say, including the prelims, as well as bets for every single UFC event, a wide range of bets, things like over-unders, straight money line bets, all kinds of stuff on there. Pretty much all types of bets on the website are profitable. And you'll also find a VIP chat room where you can talk to myself, other members of the MMA betting community, to talk about upcoming fights, betting strategies, and one of the things we talk about a lot in the VIP chat room is also betting on other sports. So head on over to my website, check it out, and if you find that interesting, hopefully you will join us. So this week I want to say a big thank you to everyone that's been hitting the like button on my previous videos. I can't tell you how much of a boost it gives to videos in YouTube search rankings. You hear about YouTubers saying it all the time, like and subscribe, but it's not until recently that I've really seen it make a difference on my videos. I find that the ones that get the most comments, the most likes, they really do get a big push from YouTube, and so it makes a big difference when you guys do that. But I don't want to be one of these guys that's like and subscribe and not give anything back. So I've been thinking about ways that I can give back, and kind of like a you scratch my back, I scratch your back situation. So if you do hit the like button for me on this video, and this video receives 200 likes, I've got an idea for a new kind of video that I'm going to try to put out every week starting this week. Now there are some weeks where I won't have time to do it, like next week I'm going to London for a couple of days, so I'm not too sure I'll have time to do this video next week, but I could definitely do it this week. Because, in previous weeks I've been saying, hit the like button and I'll do these live research sessions that you see down here. But this live research session's 3 hours long. This one's 2 hours, 20 minutes long. I know most of you guys don't have the time to sit in on those or watch those videos, so they're not for everybody. I want to do something which more people can get value out of. So the idea I have got for a new series of videos that I will be dropping every Friday, the night before UFC events, is I'm going to put out a video where I break down every single fight on every UFC card from an over-under betting point of view. So I can't break down like entire cards. I can't put out like full breakdown videos like some of these guys on YouTube where they break down every single fight, because these guys are talking about each fight for 5-10 minutes and they're giving a really quick brief overview, and that's cool. But that's not my style. I like to go into a lot of detail, leave no stone unturned, give you all the information you need to make good betting decisions. So I can't break down an entire card on YouTube because these videos would be 3-4 hours long. Nobody would watch them. But what I can do is go through every single fight on a card and break it down in terms of over-unders, whether this fight will be good for betting, over-under, fight goes the distance, fight doesn't go the distance, and hopefully you guys will get a lot of value from that. If I show you my results, we go to the results page and scroll down, where are they? So I have actually got, here we go, so I have actually got a profitability chart where I just purely track my profit and loss on over-under bets, and as you can see, nice steady profitability chart here where we're consistently grinding out profits. Hit a really nasty period of variance here where we took a few big losses in a short space of time. But for the most part, most months we're profitable and we have this nice steady profitability uptrend. So if you would like me to do those every week, doing videos specifically tailored towards betting over-unders, I'll literally go through every fight, talk about it, whether the over-under on each fight is worth betting or not. Yeah, let me know if you would like that. And if this video gets 200 likes, I'll be dropping that video on Friday. So every Friday we will do it. Some weeks I might not be able to get it done because I might be really busy or something's going on. But if I'm not going to be able to get one of those videos out for you on a Friday. I'll do my best to tell you in the breakdown video that comes out earlier in the week. So I know for a fact I can do it this week. Next week might be dicey because I'm going to London for a couple of days to watch Soccer Aid. Those of you in the UK will know what Soccer Aid is. Go with my family, should be a lot of fun. So yeah, hit the like button for me if you can. If you like this content, if you want that over/under video this week, subscribe if you haven't already. And we're almost ready to get into these breakdowns, man. Before we do, I just want to just give the disclaimer that this is not financial advice. You know, gambling is a very, very difficult thing to do and be profitable at. It's extremely difficult. I've been betting on sports for 20 years now. Been betting on MMA for 15 years. It's a long, hard road. Took me a long time to become profitable. You know, a lot of mistakes had to be made, had to lose a lot of money, and it was a constant process of tweaking, learning, evolving, and getting better. But it was trial by fire, man, and it wasn't easy. It's a very difficult thing to do. So it's important to gamble responsibly. It's extremely hard to make money from gambling. Please know that. And again, this is not financial advice. This video is for entertainment purposes. I'm not telling you what to do. Strongly recommend you do your own research on this. You know, all the fights on this card, if you're thinking of betting any of them, please do your own research. With that being said, have been making money on MMA for a long time. I've been making a living on MMA for about 5 or 6 years now. Have been betting MMA for 15 years. So I do have a lot of experience. I do know what I'm talking about. And all the information I'm going to share with you in this video is backed up by, you know, hours and hours and hours of fight research, which is why I could talk about these fights in an extreme amount of depth. I'm not just kind of pulling things out my head, out the universe that I'm kind of making up. You know, I've put the time in so that everything I talk about in this video, I've seen with my own eyes in very recent history. And if you go watch these fight research videos, you'll see the amount of work we put into researching each of these fights. And, you know, it goes back to what I said in the disclaimer a few moments ago, man. It's extremely difficult to make money betting on sports. Everybody on MMA Twitter, everyone on sports betting Twitter talks like they're profitable, talks a big game, which can make you feel, you know, it doesn't make you feel good, man, because, you know, these guys make it sound easy, like it's so easy to make money betting sports. Everybody online is making money betting sports. It's not like that. It's brutal. So difficult. You know, I'm chained to my desk all week, working my balls off. I barely leave my desk all week. I'm always here, sat here, working, researching, learning, tweaking, getting better. And there's no shortcuts, man. Do not listen to these jabronis on Instagram that'll flop 200 grand in cash out, you know, on the table of a hotel room in Las Vegas and drive Ferraris. It's all bullshit, man. The only way you make money in this game is by being chained to a fucking desk, putting the hours in, and having giant fucking bags under your eyes because you're staring at a screen all day trying to grind out these profits. So do your own research. Understand it's tough, but that's why we put the work in, because you put the work in, you see the results, you get the money, you know, you earn the profit. It's all worthwhile, man. So let's break down the first fight that I want to talk about on this card, which is a great fight. It's an amazing main event for us all to look forward to this weekend. Is Glover Teixeira against Jiri Prochazka. It is such an interesting fight, such a complex matchup that I don't even know where to begin on this one, because we've got a lot to talk about. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds. We can see Jiri Prochazka is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.50, which is minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. And if we take a look at the odds on Glover Teixeira, he's around an average of 2.70, which is plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. So the bookies have obviously got Jiri as a pretty big favourite. And despite the fact that Jiri is a pretty big favourite, what's really interesting about this matchup is that opinions are very divided on it. There's a lot of debate around this matchup on who's going to win and who is the better bet. People have got very strong opinions on this fight. Whoever you talk to in the MMA community has got a strong opinion on this fight, and there's a lot of debate over which way it's going to go. This is unusual, because usually when you see a situation where you've got a pretty big favourite against a pretty big underdog, generally speaking, most people agree on who's more likely to win. We can use Rose Namajunas and Carla Esparza as an example from recently, where Rose was around about the same odds that Jiri is here. But despite the fact that Rose was exactly the same odds as Jiri, pretty much everyone agreed that Rose was very, very likely to win, and it would be difficult to find people picking Carla in that fight. It's not the case here. The odds are roughly the same on this fight as they were on that matchup, but people are very divided. And I think the reason why people are so divided on how they see this fight playing out is because both guys have got big advantages in the area that the other is weak. In order for there to be a lot of agreement in how everybody feels a fight's likely to go and who's more likely to win, I feel there can't be any ambiguity. It needs to be really clear cut. But it would appear that if the fight goes to the ground, Glover's going to have an advantage, and if the fight stays on the feet, Jiri's going to have an advantage. And so even though there's a lot of debate and divisiveness over who's going to win this, I think we can all agree, no matter what side of that fence we're on, no matter what opinions we hold on this matchup, I think everybody in the MMA community can agree that if the fight goes to the ground, Glover's probably going to do really well. And if the fight stays standing, Jiri is going to do really well. And that's the common ground that we've got in this fight. And so when we look at that dynamic, really, there's only one question that needs to be answered in order for us to cap this fight accurately, work out if there's a good bet on this fight, and determine who's more likely to win. The only question we need to answer is, can Glover get this fight to the ground? And can he keep it on the ground for long enough to make a difference? Because, if Glover hits a takedown but Jiri immediately pops back up to his feet, well, even if Glover does have an advantage on the ground, he may not get an opportunity to use it. So this is a really complex matchup, and we're obviously going to be breaking down how they match up both standing up and on the ground. But it's very important to remember to just focus on what is important when trying to determine which one of these guys gives you the better risk to reward ratio, who is the better bet. Ultimately, we just need to do our best at answering that one question: can Glover get this fight to the ground and keep this fight on the ground? And that is going to be a real main focus of this breakdown video. So before we get into talking about how they match up from a technical point of view, let's take a look at the tail of the tape. Glover, 42 years old, 6'2" with a 76-inch reach. Jiri, 29 years old, 6'3" with an 80-inch reach. So straight away, there's a couple of big X factors for us to dig into. The first being Glover's age. He's 42 years old. And, for 42 years old, he looks like a 42-year-old fighter. Glover has declined a lot over the last few years. He's, picked up some amazing wins along the way, and he's really adjusted and evolved his fighting style to kind of adapt to the limitations of his body at 42 years old. He doesn't move as well as he used to. His reflexes aren't what they were. He's not as fast and sharp as he used to be. But he's made adjustments, and he's gone from being an aggressive pressure fighter that would like to come forward and use his boxing to wear opponents down, to now a fighter that uses a lot more grapplings. We've seen a lot of evolution in Glover's skill set, but at 42 years old, he is on a steep decline. He is going to be getting worse from fight to fight. And, Father Time is undefeated. We know that there are not many guys in their 40s competing in the UFC for a reason, and even less guys in their 40s competing at the very top of the division. So Glover is on borrowed time. And with Jiri being 13 years younger than him, we know statistically the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. Now, there's a 13-year age gap in this fight, and I don't even have stats that go that far. I've only got a stat that runs up to 10-year age advantage for the younger fighter. And so, if you're purely blind betting MMA based on that statistic, and you look at the odds on Jiri, 1.50 minus 200, that gives you an implied probability of 67%. If we know that the younger fighter wins 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight, you're already getting almost a 3.5% margin over the bookies just purely blind betting that statistic. Now, is dangerous blind betting statistics like that? Statistics are far more powerful when you apply qualitative analysis to use them to a use them to make much better betting decisions than to solely focus your entire strategy around just betting stats. But that certainly is a powerful stat, and you can see purely based on that stat alone, Glover's got a big mountain to climb here, and at 42 years old, he's not going to be getting any better, whereas Jiri at 29 years old is still a baby in the light heavyweight division. We'll talk a little bit about this as the breakdown progresses, but even though Jiri has had over 30 pro fights, he's still very inexperienced, and when you see him in his fights, he's still very green. And one of the reasons why he is very green and he is very inexperienced is because he's kind of a victim of his own success. He's so good, he's so dangerous, that if you look at his record, he's got so many first round finishes that he hasn't spent tons of time in real fights being tested against a really good level of opponent. And so there are still a lot of things that Jiri needs to learn and get better at, but you'd expect that. A 29-year-old light heavyweight is very young in the division, and he's going to have big weaknesses at this stage in his career. That's just the way it is. But he's got time on his side. Glover doesn't. Jiri's got his whole career ahead of him. Give him another 3-4 years, and by the time he's in his mid-30s, this guy is going to be a nightmare. But at the moment, he is a bit raw, and because of that, because of his inexperience in certain areas, that does give Glover some opportunity in this fight to cause an upset. One more time, how many times have we seen Glover win against all the odds? So in terms of the size of these two, Glover's 6'2" with a 76-inch reach, and Jiri is 6'3" with an 80-inch reach. So that's a nice 4-inch reach advantage for Jiri, which is huge for a guy like him that does fight very long and knows how to use his length. He moves very well on the feet. He's way more mobile than your average light heavyweight. He fights and moves like someone in a much lighter weight class. And that 4-inch reach advantage is really going to help him deliver big power to Glover without Glover being in a range where he can counter unless he comes forward, covers a lot of distance, which is going to put him in even more danger of eating big counters from Jiri. So that reach advantage is a big factor in that fight. And before we get into talking about how these two guys match up in terms of striking and grappling, I also want to focus on one more X factor, which kind of ties into the stuff that we've already been talking about with Jiri in terms of his inexperience and in terms of his size, and that is that he does fit the kind of criteria for a fighter that will be very prone to adrenaline dumping and gassing out as the fight wears on. Now, Jiri's gas tank at present is a bit of an unknown because so many of his past fights have ended very quickly, and the fights that did go into the second round and did go into the third round were fights where his opponents were kind of in a defensive shell and allowed Jiri to dictate the pace. This makes it really difficult to get a read on where Jiri's gas tank actually is, because it's much easier to control your heart rate, control your breathing, control your energy levels when you're in complete control, because you can decide when to attack and when to ease off a little bit and catch your breath and recover. So again, Jiri is a little bit of a victim of his own success in this because he's so dangerous on the feet that guys do show him a lot of respect on the feet, and that has made a lot of his past fights pretty comfortable. Now, Jiri's gas tank for the most part has held up in these past fights because, like I say, he was allowed to be the hammer. He wasn't the nail. He wasn't forced to react to what his opponent is doing. It's far more exhausting when you're on the back foot, you're having to defend, and you're not dictating the exchanges, when you're not able to control your heart rate and breathing because your opponent is constantly coming forward and attacking. That's where we can see guys like Jiri wear down and burn themselves out very quick. And a really good example of this that you can go and watch for yourselves happens in the Dominic Reyes fight. If you go back and watch that fight, notice in round one, Jiri's output is really high, and he's light on his feet and he's bouncing around all over the place and he's a big ball of energy. But in the final minute of the first round against Reyes, Jiri becomes a lot flatter. His movement, his footwork, everything is flatter. There's a real heaviness about everything that he does compared to the first 4 minutes of that round, which is the first sign that Jiri is starting to slow down. But then Jiri obviously recognises that he's getting tired, so in the first minute of round two, he really, really slows the pace down. And Jiri barely does anything in the first minute of round 2. And so he's had that minute to recover in between rounds 1 and 2. And then he's had another minute to recover at the start of round 2. This is obviously great because it shows that he's very aware of his pacing and his need to control his output so that he doesn't gas out, as the fight progresses. But it's also a bit of a red flag because Jiri won't be given the opportunity to play that game against all types of opponents that he's going to face. Reyes by that point was hurt, he was in a defensive shell, and he was probably happy to have a minute's break from Jiri trying to kill him as well. So he played that game and he didn't attack Jiri for the first minute of round 2. Guys like Glover are not going to give Jiri those opportunities to rest and recover in fights. We know what Glover's like. He's going to be walking Jiri down, trying to tie him up in the clinch and rough him up with his dirty boxing, or shooting takedowns and trying to drag Jiri to the ground. There's going to be no breaks and no pauses in the action here. Even at 42 years old, Glover's still relentless. We know Glover can still fight at a high pace for 25 minutes. His gas tank has never been in question. So someone like Glover that will keep coming forward for 25 minutes can test Jiri's gas tank in ways that it has never been tested before. And when I said a few moments ago that Jiri does fit all the characteristics of a fighter that will slow down a lot as fights wear on, that's because I'm talking about general trends, right? There will always be exceptions to the rule. There will always be guys like Kamaru Usman that defy logic. A guy like Usman, his size, his build, his muscular physique, guys like Usman shouldn't be able to sprint hard for 25 minutes without slowing down. I don't think I've ever even seen Usman breathe heavy, let alone gas out. He's a freak, a genetic freak, and it just doesn't make any sense. So there will always be outliers like Usman that break the mold. But when it comes to betting on MMA, and when it comes to making betting decisions where there are gaps in information, what we need to do is make the best decision possible based on general trends in MMA. And so there is a big question mark over Jiri's gas tank, and we don't know if he's a cardio machine or someone that will adrenaline dump and slow down. But what we do know is guys that fit Jiri's profile are usually very prone to burning themselves out and adrenaline dumping if they don't get the job done early. This is for a few reasons. The first reason being his size. It's simple biology, right? 6'3" with an 80-inch reach. This guy is massive. He's big and muscular, and guys this big aren't designed to fight like Jiri fights. This guy bounces around in the octagon. He's light on his feet. There's loads of movement. He throws spinning attacks, flying attacks. Guys as big as Jiri are not designed to fight like that. One of the things that makes Jiri great is that he is fast and mobile and explosive, and he fights like someone in a much lighter weight class. But for how long can he fight like someone in a lighter weight class? Guys as big as Jiri generally cannot compete for that long at the pace that Jiri fights at. A good example that I can think of, I'm not saying Jiri is a lot better than Johnny Walker. He's much better than Johnny Walker, right? But it wasn't that long ago people were talking about Johnny Walker as potentially fighting John Jones for the title. Remember when he came in and he was smoking everyone in round 1? People were saying, this guy's unstoppable. He's a beast. He's a nightmare. And back then, even then, I was saying, hang on, man. Let's see what this guy looks like past round 1. Because guys like Johnny Walker, guys like Jiri can look amazing for one round, amazing for 6 or 7 minutes. But what happens if you weather that early storm and drag them into the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th round? Are they still going to be light on their feet? Are they still going to be bouncing around in the octagon? Are they still going to be throwing spinning shit and flying shit and throwing a huge volume of power strikes? It's unlikely. Guys like Jiri tend to adrenaline dump and burn themselves out with the pace that they fight at. And maybe Jiri is the outlier, but more often than not, Jiri's style of fighting is unsustainable. And like I say, there are some signs of that in his past fights against Dominic Reyes in particular. He looked much flatter in round 2 than he did in round 1. Go check out that fight. You'll see it for yourself. But now let's talk about how these two guys match up stylistically. And when it comes to striking, it's a very easy fight to break down. If this fight stays standing, even if Jiri were to get very tired, I still think Glover would be in a world of trouble. Jiri is a nightmare on the feet. He's fast, he's aggressive, he's very accurate as well for a guy as reckless as Jiri. And he's just an absolute nightmare on the feet. He's a devastating knockout artist, and he's a problem for everyone in the division. There's no doubt about it. Glover is slow and flat and doesn't move well, doesn't see the shots coming like he used to, and, you know, can't take a shot like he used to. His reflexes just aren't there anymore. So there's no doubt that Glover is going to be an absolute sitting duck in front of Jiri on the feet. And the thing about Jiri is he's one of these guys that doesn't let you off the hook. You know, we were saying a few moments ago how his style of fighting is unsustainable in terms of you can't go as hard as he does for very long without burning yourself out. But at the same time, that's one of the things that makes him so dangerous, because he just overwhelms you. And we saw it in the Reyes fight. He just overwhelmed Reyes and didn't give him any time to recover. Every time he got Reyes hurt, he just overwhelmed him with a barrage of strikes and a really diverse range of strikes, uppercuts, wide hooks, straight punches, jabs. The guy's a nightmare. And we know Glover's got a habit of getting wobbled and rocked. As soon as Glover gets hurt in this fight, Jiri is just going to swarm him. And it is very difficult to see a realistic scenario in which Glover could survive that. So look, Jiri is going to have an enormous advantage on the feet. Perhaps in the third, the fourth, the fifth round, if Glover can get Jiri really tired, Glover can start to have some success with his dirty boxing. But even then, Jiri is so big, so tough, so powerful. I think Glover's going to be at constant risk of being knocked out so long as this fight is standing. What I will say about Jiri, though, even though he will have a big advantage on the on the feet, massive advantage when it comes to striking, he is very green on the feet. His striking is very loosey-goosey, and he is very bad defensively. His striking defense is really, really bad. If you go and watch his fights against Dominic Reyes and Volkan Oezdemir, you'll see that he fights with his hands down low, chin up high, doesn't see the shots coming, runs forward in straight lines and doesn't move his head much. And this is the reason why he got wobbled a couple times by Oezdemir and dropped by Dominic Reyes. His striking defense is very, very poor. But I don't think Glover's going to be able to make him pay for it. Glover's never really had one-shot knockout power. Glover's also always been one of these guys that kind of breaks you down with volume. And so I don't think he's going to be able to make Jiri pay for his recklessness or his bad defense. But I think as Jiri starts to face a step up in competition, faces these more technical strikers like a Thiago Santos or a Magomed Ankalaev or a Jamal Hill, I think you're really going to start to see Jiri's striking exposed a little bit, because they're going to have the boxing, the accuracy to really make Jiri pay for that recklessness. But his striking is very likely to cause Glover ginormous problems in this matchup. So in terms of grappling, it's a very, very interesting fight, because we know that is basically the path to victory for Glover. He's going to find it very difficult to survive on the feet early against Jiri, so he needs to get this fight to the ground. So this is where we come back to answering that question. What is the probability that Glover can get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground? And unfortunately, there's not that much good quality footage available on Jiri's takedown offense and ground game for us to answer that question with a high degree of accuracy. But what we can do is look at past fights and look at flashes and moments which will give us some clues to assess the likelihood that Glover's going to be able to grind out a win here using a grappling heavy game plan. So we did see him give up a cheap takedown in his last fight against Dominic Reyes. But I think one thing that really helped Reyes get that takedown was that he had the element of surprise on his hands. Reyes very rarely uses takedowns and grappling, and so Jiri kind of ran into it and got caught flat-footed and cold. So even though Jiri did give up a very weak takedown in that fight and did look quite weak off his back, I don't really want to hold that against him, because Glover won't have the element of surprise on his hands. Jiri is not stupid. It's going to be very, very obvious what Glover's strategy is coming into this fight. And so Jiri is going to be waiting for the takedown, expecting the takedown. And that makes it far more difficult for Glover to land that takedown. So we were being really critical of Jiri's striking defense. And we were saying, you know, against Oezdemir and Reyes, his striking defense looked very bad. He was very reckless and he looked very, very vulnerable on the feet. What is super interesting about Jiri is that we've seen a completely different side of him in another one of his matchups. So one of the reasons why it's very difficult to kind of gauge where Jiri's takedown offense and ground game is at this stage in his career is he hasn't really fought too many, you know, really good wrestlers, really good grapplers that have been able to get in deep on his legs and test that takedown offense before he knocked them out. The only guy that was, you know, a grappler and spent long enough in the fight to actually test Jiri's takedown offense was King Mo. Now, King Mo, despite being a former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler, obviously his best days are behind him and he's not as good of a grappler as he used to be. But what I find so interesting about this fight is that we see a completely different version of Jiri than we got in the Reyes and Oezdemir fights. So if you go back and watch the Reyes and Oezdemir fights, Jiri is a wild man. He comes out with a chaotic style of fighting, chin up high, hands down low, swinging for the fences, you know, eating big counters and getting dropped and wobbled and turning the fights into crazy brawls. And if you watch those two fights, you're like, you know what, Glover's got a really good chance of beating this guy because he's so reckless, he will leave himself open to being taken down. And after watching those two fights, I was like, damn, you know what, might be a bit of value on Glover here. Because I was kind of thinking like Jiri was one of these guys with bad fight IQ, one of these guys that didn't really consider his output, and as a result maybe prone to gassing and adrenaline dumping, and also one of these guys had like a kill or be killed style where he was very wild and very reckless and would, you know, overexpose himself because of how bad he was defensively. But then I watched this fight against King Mo and we just see a completely different style of Jiri, which makes me take him a lot more seriously and makes me think that this could be an absolute nightmare stylistic matchup for Glover. So if we go back and watch that Jiri fight against Reyes and Oezdemir, one of Jiri's biggest weaknesses in those fights was that he would kind of run forward in straight lines, chin up high, hands down low, and just stand in front of his opponents, fucking winging big wide hooks, leaving himself wide open to big counters and leaving his lower body open to takedown entries. But Jiri does none of that here. Straight away, we can see a completely different approach to this fight from Jiri. Look at his stance. You know, he's not bouncing around on his feet all the time. You know, he's light on his feet, don't get me wrong, but he's not bouncing around like a crazy person. And he's got his knees bent in that low stance. You know, hands down low, but chin nice and tucked, hands down low, in a good position to dig underhooks when King Mo potentially shoots in. And he's just in that lower stance. He's making his body, his frame more compact, so that when King Mo does shoot in, it's going to be far harder for King Mo to get in on Jiri's legs and hips and upset his balance before Jiri can actually get underhooks in play and start fighting the takedown. And what's so interesting about this fight to me is that Jiri does a really good job of reading King Mo's subtle changes in body language that indicate King Mo is about to level change and shoot in for a takedown. What you'll notice about Jiri in his, you know, 2 UFC fights against Reyes and Oezdemir is that he does an awful job of reading both guys. He just doesn't see the shots coming, and this is why I've described Jiri's striking as green and raw and very inexperienced, because he just doesn't read his opponent that well. But then he reads King Mo really well. And his approach to this fight is totally different, because against Oezdemir and Reyes, when Oezdemir and Reyes would come forward and attack him, he would kind of just stand his ground, plant his feet, close his eyes, and wing bombs back to try and deter them from coming forward, which obviously, you know, inflicted a lot of damage on them, but also, like I say again, you know, opened up his lower body to potential takedown attempts and opened him up, the big head strikes and counters. Watch his approach here. Every time King Mo comes forward, Jiri's not interested in planting his feet and firing back with big counters. Instead, he's looking to just slip back and circle away, or slip back and if the opportunity presents itself, pick King Mo off with like a range-finding counter-strike. So in this fight, Jiri is giving King Mo tons of respect. He didn't give Oezdemir or Reyes any respect at all and put himself at significant risk of being knocked out in both fights. Like I say, he got wobbled multiple times by Oezdemir, dropped by Reyes. In this fight, he puts defense first, he focuses on counter-striking, and he looks absolutely great. He completely neutralizes the threat of anything that King Mo tries to do to him. Look at how he uses his length and his range here. Every time King Mo comes forward and attacks, he just circles away. Look at this. It's brilliant. He just stands in front of King Mo, uses his length to chip away at King Mo, and anytime King Mo comes forward, he reads it, backs up, circles away. Look at this. Look at the head movement. I love it. And of course, we're at the moment seeing Jiri use this to evade strikes, but as we go through this footage, we're also going to see him use this to evade takedown attempts as well, which is what he's really going to need to do against Glover. But look at little sequences like this. King Mo's coming forward aggressively, trying to tie Jiri up, but he can't get anywhere near Jiri because as soon as he changes his body language and comes forward, Jiri reads him, just circles away. Look at this. King Mo comes forward, and he just circles away. And he wasn't doing any of this against Oezdemir or Reyes. In those fights, he would plant his feet, look to fire back, which would leave him vulnerable to takedowns and counters. And this is just what we see from Jiri. Look at this. Little sequences like this. Look, circling away. Beautiful stuff. Great striking defense. Look, just circling away. King Mo follows it up now and tries to grab a hold of him. Watch, and he just backs up, circles away, doesn't let King Mo get in on the legs. Beautiful stuff. Look at this. Every time King Mo comes forward, he's just not there. Does a great job of reading King Mo. Look at this. So anyway, we keep skipping through. What I really like is this example. This is a great example. Watch this. So King Mo comes forward, throws an outside leg kick to sweep the leg of Jiri and drop him. Now, in the Oezdemir and Reyes fights, I've got no doubt that Jiri would have just planted his feet, closed his eyes, and just swung back to try and deter Reyes and Oezdemir from continuing to attack him. What I really like about this sequence is that Jiri gets dropped off an outside leg kick. But even in this moment of chaos, even in this moment where King Mo's put him in a bad position, he still has that clarity of mind to stick to the game plan and strategy. And he knows he can't let King Mo get in on top of him, and he can't allow King Mo to get in on his legs and hips. So even in this moment, he remembers what the game plan and strategy is, and immediately pops back up to his feet. And then inevitably, King Mo sees this as an opportunity to shoot in deep on the legs and hips. And Jiri recognizes that threat, and all he's got in his mind is disengage, show him strong hips, clear my legs, and get the fuck out of here before he can take me down. Look at this, and he does. Keeps his hands low to get any underhooks in play that he may need to if King Mo gets in on the takedown, and just circles away. It's beautiful stuff, man. Absolutely beautiful. And every time he reads King Mo, and as a result, King Mo can't get near a takedown. So we'll keep going. A few more examples. I've kind of made my point, so we'll whiz through this one as quick as we can. This is probably the deepest takedown attempt of this fight. Gets in on the legs here, but look at the strong hips of Jiri. Look at this. King Mo shoots in deep, strong hips. Overhook on the left side. Starts fighting for an underhook on the right side. And just shows him strong hips. Circles away until King Mo's forced to let it go. And again, he just doesn't want King Mo anywhere near him. Disengages, circles away. Beautiful work from Jiri, man. Very, very, very impressive. And we can go on, over-analyze this, pick out different spots. I think you guys catch the drift by now. Here's another example. King Mo comes forward. Jiri's not interested in getting into any crazy exchanges. Just backs up, circles away, and frustrates King Mo. So why is this relevant? Why is this video footage so important? Well, first of all, it's important because we don't have a lot else to work with. There's not tons of footage on Jiri's takedown offense or ground game. But what we do know from that fight is that he isn't a one-trick pony. He's not just this wild, crazy, chaotic guy that's going to come in and look to kill his opponents in 30 seconds and then potentially burn himself out. There's more sides to Jiri. He's a more complex fighter than that, and possibly a more intelligent fighter than I gave him credit for, you know, in his first 2 fights in the UFC. He's shown me a different side to him, and what's really interesting about this side is that at that pace, Jiri's not going to get tired because he's not having to exert that much energy. He's counter-striking, he's using his power, his strength, his physicality, his athleticism in reverse to keep his opponents on the outside, and he's just chipping away at them with volume. He's not loading up on big spinning attacks and big power punches and big flying shit that's going to use a lot of energy. Instead, he's just chipping away, conserving energy, and that style of Jiri is a very, very, very difficult style to deal with because he's not overexposing himself, which would lead him open to big power shots and takedowns, and he's not exerting a crazy amount of energy that will likely result in him adrenaline dumping and burning out, you know, if his opponents weather the early storm. So that version of Jiri that we've just seen against King Mo is an absolute nightmare for Glover, because we know at this stage in Glover's career, he's flat-footed, he's stiff, and all of Glover's takedown attempts come above hip height. You know, he doesn't have the athleticism, the speed, the driving deep on his opponent's legs and hips anymore. Most of Glover's takedown attempts start above hip height, and then he gradually, you know, works into a trip or a throw off the body lock. But if you can't get to the body lock because Jiri won't allow you to tie up with him because you can't get near him because his footwork and movement is too good, then a guy like Glover is going to be in a lot of trouble. So if we wrap everything we've said up here and look at this fight from a betting perspective, it's a great stylistic matchup for Jiri because we've seen 2 different sides of him. The reckless, wild, chaotic, dangerous Jiri that we saw in his fights against Oezdemir and Reyes, and the more measured, controlled, intelligent, smart version of Jiri that we saw against King Mo. And both styles are difficult styles for Glover to deal with, because if we get the wild, chaotic Jiri, then Jiri's going to be super dangerous on the feet early, and Glover is, you know, going to find it very, very difficult to survive, right? Because we know, you know, how easy Glover is to hit on the feet and how scary and dangerous Jiri is. But if we get the other version of Jiri, you know, the version of Jiri that is, you know, safe and smart and measured and controlled, well, then Glover's going to find it extremely difficult to get a takedown because Jiri's so hard to tie up and take down when he fights like that. So whatever version of Jiri we see this weekend, Glover has an absolutely massive mountain to climb, and it's a very difficult stylistic matchup for him. So in terms of betting this fight, there's no way that I would touch Glover this weekend, just because I think his path to victory is so slim. Sure, he probably does have an advantage on the ground, but whatever version of Jiri shows up, Glover's going to find it very difficult to get there. So Glover's path to victory is very, very, very narrow here. Now, in terms of betting Jiri, should you bet Jiri? It's a tough one. It's not personally the kind of bet that I like, because I think Jiri's advantages for the most part are baked into his odds. You know, odds of 1.50 minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. I don't see a ton of value there. But if you do want to bet this fight, I would not be betting Glover this weekend. I would absolutely be going for Jiri, and I think he wins a very, very high percentage of the time. So I hope you found that useful. Let's move on to the next fight. Now let's break down the fight between Taylor Santos and Valentina Shevchenko, which I think is a far more interesting fight from a betting point of view than a lot of people realise. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Valentina Shevchenko, biggest favourite on the card, just like she is in all of her fights, at average odds at the moment of around 1.16, which is minus 625 for an implied probability of 86%. If we take a look at the odds on Taylor Santos, she's around an average of 5.50, which is plus 450 for an implied probability of 18%. Taylor Santos is 28 years old, 5'6", with a 68-inch reach, and Shevchenko is 34 years old, 5'5", with a 65.5-inch reach. So a couple of X factors for us to dig into there. Nothing super major, but definitely a couple of things that we should pay attention to. So the first being the age of these two fighters. At 28 years old, Taylor Santos is very young, and as a result, she's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. We've already seen massive improvements from Taylor Santos. She's far better now than she was in her debut against Mara Romero Barella, and she continues to look better and better every time we see her in the octagon. And at 28 years old, that's only going to continue. She's got a lot of improving to do over the next few years. At 34 years old though, Shevchenko is starting to get pretty old for a flyweight. We know that the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes and athleticism, which tend to be the first things that go as you start to get older, and so 34 years old is pretty old for a flyweight. Now, we haven't seen any sort of signs of decline in Shevchenko, and at 34 years old I wouldn't expect to see sudden decline in Shevchenko that you can see in someone like a Glover Teixeira who's in their 40s. But what I would say is at this stage in her career, you would expect to start seeing slight declines from fight to fight, and on top of that, we know Shevchenko has probably plateaued at this point in her career. Very unlikely that you're going to see improvement from Shevchenko with her being in her mid-30s and having 25 pro fights. The old saying goes, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and Shevchenko at this stage in her career is pretty much, I think, at her peak, as good as she is going to get. So when we're researching this matchup, we can anticipate a bit of improvement from Santos and perhaps a little bit of decline in Shevchenko. At the very least, she's not going to look any better than she has in the past, which makes it, pretty easy to expect pretty easy to kind of expect or know what to expect from Shevchenko coming into this fight. So a big part of approaching this fight from a betting point of view is considering the odds and the implied probabilities that those odds represent on both fighters, because remember, this game is not about picking who is more likely to win. It is about finding bets that come with a good risk to reward ratio, and all the content that we produce here on this channel is geared towards identifying which fighter gives you the better risk to reward ratio from a betting point of view in terms of the odds. Now, we're all going to be in agreement watching this that Valentina Shevchenko is more likely to win this fight this weekend. You'll be very hard pushed to find anyone picking Taylor Santos to win this fight. But, like with many fights where, it's pretty clear who should be favoured, the fighters' odds largely reflect the advantages that they have, and we see that with Shevchenko. If we pop her odds into the implied probability calculator, we can see that those odds represent an implied probability of 86%, which means you need to give Shevchenko a better than 86% chance of winning to get any value in the odds here, which is an extremely difficult thing to do in any MMA fight because of how chaotic and unpredictable the sport of MMA can be. Even before you consider how these two fighters match up from a stylistic point of view, there are loads of ways that Shevchenko could lose this fight. She might, throw a knee by accident to a downed opponent and get disqualified. She might have a point deducted, which could mess up the scoring of this fight. Maybe she throws a kick, breaks a leg, and, gets injured in the fight. Just a few weeks ago, we saw Rakic doing really well against Jan Blachowicz before blowing his knee out. Maybe she, catches a crazy elbow or something in the fight which cuts her really bad and the doctor stops it. Maybe she has a bad weight cut. Maybe she's coming into this fight injured. We see fighters do it all the time. Maybe she suffers from performance anxiety on the night, although granted, that one's super unlikely. This girl is an absolute consistent killer. Or, maybe she's just not feeling it on the day though. There are a lot of things that can influence a fighter's performance. And of course, all these things influence Taylor Santos's performance as well. But the difference with Taylor Santos is that you've got far more room for error. You can accept way more risk with Taylor Santos because her odds give you a much better payout. Whereas with Shevchenko, there is no room for error. At an implied probability of 86%, she has to have virtually no way to lose. And if you can identify any kind of realistic scenarios in which she could lose, there's just no value here. So straight away, a bet on Shevchenko is off the table. But if you're an experienced grappler, you'll know this already. I'm not teaching you, telling you guys anything you don't know. You guys know this shit. So for me, from a betting point of view, all I'm interested in when I research this fight is whether or not there's value on Taylor Santos, because I know there's absolutely no value on Shevchenko. It doesn't matter how likely you think she is to win. It's difficult to cap someone at better than 86% in MMA. So if we look at the odds on Taylor Santos, 5.50 plus 450 for an implied probability of 18%. It's very attractive to me. I like these odds. Whenever I see a fighter in this odds range, I'm always, interested in how they match up with their opponent. Because, like I say, to command odds of 1.16 minus 625, you need to have virtually no way to lose. And if you can find a realistic path to victory for the underdog, you'll quite often find value in the underdog's odds, because you don't need to win many of these bets to be profitable long term. At the end of the day, if you could cap Taylor Santos at just having a 30% chance of winning this fight, that would be a really good margin over the bookie. And over the long term, placing bets such as this, you should be pretty profitable. Obviously, there are no guarantees, but so long as your fighter has got a reasonably good chance of winning, if you're taking them at big dog odds, and I'm talking big dog odds, not slight dog odds, you're playing a dangerous game if you bet guys or girls with only a relatively small or moderate path to victory at moderate underdog odds. That doesn't guarantee a profit long term, because we're not dealing with repeatable outcomes here. This isn't the flip of a coin. Santos and Shevchenko are never going to fight again. If Santos loses this weekend and you bet her, your money's dead in the water. We're not fighting again next weekend. They're not fighting 10 times where you can make your money if Santos wins 2 or 3 out of the 10. It doesn't work like that. So it's a dangerous game to play when you're betting on fighters where you only get a slight margin, a moderate margin. But in situations where you can bet big underdogs and get big margins over the bookies, you virtually guarantee yourself profit long term, so long as you're, accurately capping the fight, doing research and assessing the risk to reward on both sides here. So I will be betting Taylor Santos this weekend, and I do think there's good value in her odds for all the reasons that I will explain in this video. So both these girls are primarily strikers. We know that Valentina Shevchenko has got a background in Muay Thai, and so does Taylor Santos. These two girls have got a base in Muay Thai, but what we see from them is very different styles of Muay Thai. Taylor Santos is big and powerful and likes to walk her opponent down and load up on big, powerful punches. And she's the kind of fighter with the old-fashioned shuto box style, where she will take control of the center of the octagon, walk her opponent down, and just look to overwhelm them with her power and physicality. Shevchenko is a lot different. She favors counter-striking. She's light on her feet and does a really good job of controlling the distance, reading her opponents, and using her ability to read her opponents to get out the way of their attacks when they come after her and counter them, when they present opportunities to land a counter. So Santos is very aggressive, very offensive. Shevchenko is more passive and defensive, but she's also dangerous offensively with those counters, because she's very accurate, very fast, very dangerous on the feet herself, and very elusive, difficult to hit. Valentina Shevchenko's striking defense is brilliant. So on the feet, it's an interesting stylistic matchup, because even though Santos is usually very aggressive, girls often freeze in front of Valentina because she's so elusive and so difficult to hit. So usually you see Santos coming forward, throwing a high volume of strikes, being very aggressive, but she might find it difficult to do that against Valentina, because she may come forward and find that Valentina's not willing to engage on the feet. She'll be slipping back, circling away, and Santos might just find herself walking on the big counters, which could really make her rethink her usual aggressive style of striking. We might end up in a situation where Santos doesn't feel safe or comfortable coming forward aggressively like she usually does, and we may end up with like a technical point fighting contest in the middle of the octagon, which is exactly what Shevchenko wants, and obviously exactly what Shevchenko is very good at. We've seen Shevchenko light girls up, pick them apart, systematically break them down on the feet time and time and time again. And if this fight stays standing, it's very likely that's exactly what she's going to do to Taylor Santos. But remember what we said a few moments ago. In order to find value in a really big underdog in MMA, you just need to see if they've got, a realistic path to victory. And I believe that Taylor Santos does. Because I think if this fight goes to the ground, Taylor Santos could cause Valentina Shevchenko big trouble. Now, of course, we've seen Valentina Shevchenko use grappling to cause a lot of her past opponents big problems. Even though Shevchenko is primarily a striker with a base in Muay Thai, her grappling's decent. She's strong, powerful, explosive. She's got great judo throws and trips off the body lock. And she's used grappling to great effect to beat recent opponents like Jessica Andrade, and Jennifer Maia, even Liz Carmouche, who is a strong wrestler in herself. But one weakness that has always existed in Valentina Shevchenko's skill set is her takedown defense and ground game. Shevchenko is one of these fighters that if you put her on her back, she is extremely weak off her back, and you can hold her down for long periods of time and rack up a lot of top control. If you go and watch the third round of the Jennifer Maia fight, Maia's able to take her down easily and hold her down for a long period of time. And I know it was a very long time ago, but we also saw Amanda Nunes totally dominate Shevchenko on the ground. Now, I know Shevchenko has improved her grappling a lot since then, but one thing we need to consider is that over the last few years, Shevchenko hasn't really fought many opponents with the skill set capable of potentially exploiting this weakness. If we go through her recent opponents, Lauren Murphy, stiff, rigid, flat-footed, takedown entries come above hip height. Lauren wasn't able to match the physicality and athleticism of Shevchenko. Therefore, even though Murphy is predominantly a grappler, she just couldn't get near a takedown on Shevchenko. Jessica Andrade, we know, has pretty bad takedown defense. She's always been pretty weak off her back, and she kind of froze in that fight and was overwhelmed by Shevchenko. Never had a chance to get her grappling going. Jennifer Maia, we know, also is a striker based in Muay Thai, has bad takedown defense and a ground game, bad ground game herself. But despite that, she did have a bit of success against Shevchenko on the ground, but for the most part, struggled very, very bad to deal again with the strength and the physicality of Shevchenko. Caitlin Chukagian, we know, predominantly has a base in BJJ, and aside from her performance against Antonina Shevchenko, has never really shown very good wrestling. She's also very weak off her back, easy to hold down. Liz Carmouche is a very strong wrestler, and out of all the girls that Shevchenko has fought in the UFC, Carmouche is probably the strongest wrestler, but for whatever reason, Carmouche chose not to wrestle in that fight. And of course, bad fight IQ and a tentative, passive fighting style is something that's plagued Carmouche throughout her entire career. She's one of these fighters that just isn't aggressive enough and doesn't have a high enough output, and for whatever reason, she just didn't shoot takedowns in that fight, didn't try to use her grappling. And it's also worth noting, she was in her late 30s when she fought Shevchenko, so way past her prime. Jessica I, striker. Joanna Jedrzejczyk, striker. Cachoeira, no takedown defense or ground game. The Nunes fight was a stand-up fight. Again, Pena, similar to Lauren Murphy, struggled with the physicality and athleticism of Valentina Shevchenko. Holly Holm, predominantly a striker, and then we get back all the way to the Amanda Nunes fight, where we're pretty much at the beginning of Shevchenko's UFC career, and a fight in which she was pretty much dominated on the ground until Nunes gassed herself out. So even though Shevchenko is strong and athletic and has great judo throws, heavy top game, good grappling control, she is one of those fighters that any time we've seen her put on her back, her opponents have been able to hold her down very, very easily. She just isn't very good at working her way back up to her feet. And something that we spoke about a lot when going through each of those opponents that she's faced is that many of them struggled to match the physicality and athleticism of Shevchenko, which is why they couldn't get their grappling going. Now, I'm not saying Santos is going to be able to match the physicality and athleticism of Shevchenko, because Shevchenko's an athletic freak, but she's certainly got a much better chance of matching the physicality and athleticism than a lot of Shevchenko's past opponents in the UFC. Santos is big and strong and muscular and hits hard and has a real physicality to her grappling and everything that she does. So Shevchenko is still an athletic freak, but she's not going to be able to use her athleticism to overwhelm Santos in the same way she's been able to overwhelm, opponents that don't have that real physicality to their style of fighting, like Murphy, Maya, Chookagian, Jessica Ai, etc. So, it makes for an interesting fight, because sometimes just by the way the cards fall, and cards not in terms of UFC cards, but it's a figure of speech, right? Cards in terms of the way that the turn in the river comes in poker. Sometimes you can get away with making mistakes or having a weakness in MMA for a long time, and it doesn't get exposed unless you're facing the right type of opponents. And sometimes you see fighters go on long runs without facing specific types of opponents that possess the skills to expose particular weaknesses that have been there all along. And I'll use Amanda Nunes as a good example of this. If you go back and watch any breakdown I've ever done on an Amanda Nunes fight, go back and watch my breakdown on this channel of the fight between Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes. I always say in every single Amanda Nunes breakdown, she has bad cardio. And any time in the past that we've seen Nunes forced to work very hard, she's burnt herself out, gassed herself out, and looked very, very bad. But the way the way that the things have kind of worked out throughout her title run, she didn't actually face that many opponents who could exploit that weakness. Because what you ended up was a situation where early on, her opponents respected her power so much that they were immediately in a defensive shell, and so they weren't able to kind of attack her, or they didn't try to attack her and make her work for fear of being knocked out. So her power enabled her to pace herself better and conserve energy and fight more effectively for longer in the fight. Or girls just didn't possess the athleticism, the physicality and the grappling skills to kind of get inside, wear Nunes down and tire her out without taking big damage or getting out grappled themselves. But then Juliana Pena came along, a fighter who was tough enough to take Nunes' shots on the feet, and a good enough grappler to wear Nunes down on the ground. And look what happens. Pena wins, everyone's surprised. But if you were to go back and watch my breakdowns of past Amanda Nunes fights, you'll see that I've been calling that for a very long time. And we could see something similar happen with Shevchenko. Shevchenko's amazing. She is one of the best fighters of all time. Probably, in my opinion, the female GOAT. However, she is very weak off her back. And when you're getting held down easily by someone like Jennifer Maia, it's a bad sign, because Taylor Santos is 10 times the grappler that Jennifer Maia is. So if someone like Maia can have success on the ground, I think Santos can have a lot of success on the ground too. But it's difficult to kind of gauge what level of success Santos can have on the ground, because no one's been able to get Shevchenko down and really expose how weak she is off her back. And I don't know if Santos is going to be able to do that, but it's possible. We also have to accept the fact that Santos isn't particularly good off her back as well. So if Shevchenko's able to take Santos down, Santos is likely to be in a lot of trouble on her back. But the difference is Shevchenko's odds carry an implied probability of 86%. Santos's odds carry an implied probability of 18%. And you get a much better risk to reward ratio, much better payoff with Taylor Santos. And one more thing that I think is really interesting about this fight is that Santos herself seems to have also identified this weakness in Shevchenko's skill set. Now, every week in my live betting group and in the VIP chat room and in my breakdown videos, we talk about clear and obvious path to victories that fighters have. And we can identify them easily because we just sit here, we study the footage, we identify what a fighter's weaknesses are and what their opponent needs to do to exploit them and give themselves a really good chance of winning. But time and time again, every week we see multiple examples where fighters do not take the easiest path to victory. Even though their opponent has a clear and obvious weakness, they don't fight in a way that exposes that weakness. You could have a strong grappler, or you could have a fighter with a big advantage on the ground over their opponent, and for whatever reason they just don't try to take them down that hard. We see this kind of thing all the time. So when we identify that a fighter like Taylor Santos may have one big specific advantage in a fight over their opponent. That's cool, but it's then difficult for us to gauge how likely it is that they're going to use that advantage, because in a fight like this, Taylor Santos has got a base in Muay Thai, Shevchenko's got a base in Muay Thai. If Taylor Santos is a stubborn striker with a big ego that might not want to use her grappling, she's just going to go in there and try and win a kickboxing match, right? Which we know would be a pretty big mistake and would likely result in her losing. So we're trying to gauge, okay, we know Santos might have an advantage on the ground here, but how likely it is that she comes in with a grappling heavy game plan? How likely is it? What's really cool about this fight is that Santos has laid all her cards on her table. We're talking a lot about cards in this breakdown, but she's laid all her cards on the table and been very upfront and honest about her opinion as to, you know, areas in this fight she thinks she has an advantage over Shevchenko. So take a listen to this and see what Taylor Santos says.
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go.
Yeah, no worries. It's Mashopi, was fine. Mashopi from moandsports.com. Talia, what do you think is the key route for you to win this fight?
Taylor, qual que você acha que é a chave para você vencer essa luta?
Eu creio que levar essa luta para o solo, né? A Valentina é uma atleta bem dura, tem uns pontos fortes na trocação. Mas eu creio que na luta de solo eu vou conseguir me sobressair.
So I think that taking this fight to the ground is the key. I think Valentina is very strong, and her key strong points were in striking. But I do think that if we take this down to ground, I can overcome her.
And they talk about this a little bit later on in the interview as well. Big shout out to Matern as well, member of my community who shared this interview with me. But listen to this.
Frankel, and yes, it's 1017theteam.com. For Talia Santos, where do you think you're going to be able to find success in this matchup?
Fala, onde você acha que você vai encontrar sucesso nessa luta? Quais pontos?
Então, como eu disse, a Valentina é uma atleta dura, né? Na trocação, venceu já várias oponentes duras também. Ela é uma atleta inteligente, mas eu creio que eu vou ter sucesso buscando a luta de solo, que é onde eu me sinto super bem. Eu venho de uma escola de Muay Thai também, me sinto super bem na trocação, mas eu vejo os pontos fracos dela no solo. Então, eu creio que nessa área é onde eu vou ter sucesso ali na luta.
Well, as I said before, Valentina is just a tough fighter, just one of the best, and very experienced, very intelligent in her striking. But I come from the strength of being on the ground. I think, as I said before, taking this fight down to the ground would be the best thing for me, because I do feel I have advantages. I also come from school Muay Thai, so I feel confident about my striking, but I do think that the best strategy is actually take this fight to the ground, as I said. Is to adjust.
So there we go, guys. Straight from the horse's mouth, Taylor Santos is saying that she believes she has an advantage on the ground and she's looking to utilize a grappling heavy game plan in this fight. So this is super interesting because we've got a situation here where there's a big underdog that we've studied fight footage on and identified that she likely has an advantage in one area that this fight could take place. And then we've got an interview where that fighter is coming out and saying, I'm actually going to try and use that advantage. I think that's my best path to victory. And what's even better about that is that it shows Taylor Santos has done her homework and preparation on Shevchenko, and she knows, just like we know because we've seen it from the footage, that there is a weakness there that can be exploited that past opponents probably haven't either had the skill set or the fight IQ to go out there and really go after and try to exploit. So this is a super interesting matchup for me. Of course, Shevchenko's more likely to win. She wouldn't be such a big favourite if she wasn't likely to win a very high percentage of the time. I'm not confident Taylor Santos is going to win. I don't think she wins a very high percentage of the time. But when you're betting fighters in this odds range, they don't need to win that often for you to be profitable long term. And when I look at these odds, I look at the fact that Shevchenko's always been pretty weak off her back. I look at the fact that Santos is a strong grappler that has told us she plans on using her grappling, and betting Santos this weekend is an absolute no-brainer for me. But remember, everything that we do is geared towards betting and making money long term. We're just trying to be profitable long term. I don't care who wins this weekend. I don't care if Valentina wins. I don't care if Santos wins. All I care about is putting my money in strong positions every single week, and over the long term I know that that is going to yield a profit. And Taylor Santos is absolutely a strong position this weekend. Very high risk bet, very high risk gamble. I expect her to lose, but I'm more than happy to take a gamble on her based on the fact that she has a clear, direct and obvious path to victory, and if she takes that path, she stands a pretty good chance of winning. And so for me, it's more than reasonable to cap Santos at having like a 30, maybe 35% chance of winning this fight. Maybe 35 is a bit aggressive. More than reasonable to cap Santos at 30% here, which gives us a good margin over the bookies. But if you are going to bet Santos this weekend, remember, do your own research. Understand that this bet is probably going to lose. And this is a value bet, man, where we're just rolling the dice, knowing that if we keep getting our money into strong positions like this, Santos might lose. Aldrich might lose last week, but we keep getting our money into situations like this. Over the long term, we're going to be very profitable. Look at last week. We bet JJ Aldrich last week at odds of, similar odds to this, right? Odds of about 5.0 plus 400. And look at how well JJ Aldrich did. Blanchfield didn't get near a takedown. Aldrich won the first round convincingly. She was absolutely cruising. And had Blanchfield not hit that Hail Mary submission in round 2, Aldrich was on her way to winning a pretty comfortable decision there. The fight was playing out pretty much how we thought it would, and Aldrich was a little bit unlucky. We were a little bit unlucky to take a loss there. But people betting Blanchfield, man, is a big favourite. In this odds range, we see Valentina. People throwing Blanchfield into their parlays. They were sweating, and they did not put their money in a strong position last week. They were very, very lucky that Blanchfield hit that submission in round 2. No doubt Aldrich was the strongest side to be on. And if those girls fought 10 times, unfortunately they're not going to, but if those girls fought 10 times, I would be very surprised if Blanchfield were to win 8 or 9 times, which she would have had to have in order to justify those odds. So that's a good example of how you can find a lot of value bet in MMA. And while Aldrich lost last week, she was a phenomenal bet, and Taylor Santos is a very, very similar type of bet to that. We didn't win on Aldrich last week. We took a loss. Maybe we take a loss on Santos this weekend as well. But eventually, when the odds are this wide, keep taking the big underdog. And as long as they have a reasonably good chance of winning, a clear and obvious path to victory, you're going to make a lot of money long term. There's no doubt about it. Now let's talk about the next fight on this card. Another very interesting women's MMA fight. A rematch between Joanna Jedrzejczyk and Weili Zhang. Very, very interesting stylistic matchup for this one. I actually bet Joanna Jedrzejczyk in their first fight. If I type in Joanna... Let me see, Joanna. There we go, Joanna Jedrzejczyk. You can see that I bet Jedrzejczyk in their first fight at nice underdog odds. Unfortunately, the bet didn't win, but very, very close split decision. And again, like we were talking about in the last breakdown between Santos and Shevchenko, at the end of the day, you can't control the outcome, right? Good bets don't always win, bad bets don't always lose. We use an example of JJ Aldrich Blanchfield last week, where Aldrich was a huge underdog. She won the first round, got caught in a Hail Mary sub in round 2, but there's no doubt, looking at how that fight played out, that Aldrich was by far the strongest side to be on as a big underdog. If you were betting if you were betting Blanchfield as a big favourite, you were sweating that fight big time last week, and you put your money in a really weak position and got lucky. With Weili Zhang and Joanna Jedrzejczyk, the first time they fought, we identified that it was likely to be a close competitive fight, which it was. The fight ended in a split decision. Joanna didn't win. It's unlucky. We take a loss. But again, back then, Weili Zhang was a reasonably big favourite. Jedrzejczyk was a big underdog. You've got to take the big underdog in that spot, because in a close fight that could go either way, the underdog is going to give you the better payoff, the better risk to reward ratio. We didn't win that bet, but keep getting your money in strong positions, and over the long term, you will grind out a nice profit. And that's kind of the philosophy with fights like this. If ever you can find a fight that's likely to be super competitive, one fighter's at a big dog odds, take the goddamn underdog for the value. That's why we talk about the concept of fights being dog or pass a lot of the time. Underdogs are going to give you a better risk to reward ratio than the big favorite. So knowing that I bet Joanna in their first fight, and knowing that it was razor close, right, extremely close fight that ended in a split decision, seems like a no-brainer that I would bet Joanna again in this rematch, right? Seems logical. I would just fire off a bet on Joanna. But no two fights are ever the same, and a lot has changed from, you know, their first fight to this rematch. And I think a lot of the stuff that has changed very much favors Zhang. And so, whereas before, I think Jedrzejczyk was a really good bet and presented us with a really good risk to reward ratio, and I stand by that, even though the bet lost. I think it was a great bet. Now, things are slightly different, and we need to talk about what's different about this matchup. Let's start off by digging into the odds and digging into the X factors on this one. So the odds are pretty much where they were last time, a little bit closer. Joanna's not as big of an underdog, but no massive differences here. We can see Zhang is the favourite at average odds of about 1.61, which is minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. And we can see that Jedrzejczyk is the underdog at average odds of about 2.45, which is plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. So the odds roughly set 60-40 in favour of Zhang. So Jedrzejczyk is 34 years old, 5'6" with a 65.5-inch reach. Zhang, 32 years old, 5'4" with a 63-inch reach. So both girls roughly about the same size. Jedrzejczyk a little bit taller, a little bit longer, but I don't think that means anything in the context of this matchup, because if you go back and watch their first fight, what Zhang may give up in a little bit of height and reach, she more than makes up for in strength, athleticism and physicality. So I don't think that is a big deal at all. But just like we were saying with Shevchenko, Jedrzejczyk's pretty old for a fighter in the lighter weight classes. She's going to be 35 years old in a couple of months' time. That is very, very old for a strawweight, the lightest weight class in the UFC. The lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes and athleticism, which are some of the first things to go as you start to get older. And so Jedrzejczyk, just like Shevchenko, is at that stage in her career where she may not decline that much. You know, she may not decline rapidly anytime soon, but she's certainly not going to be getting better. I'd be very surprised if she were to improve. She's more likely to have plateaued, and every time we see Jedrzejczyk, she's likely to have got a little bit worse. Now, in the live stream research session that we did for this fight, a lot of people were bringing up the fact that Joanna has had a boob job and she's got lots of sponsorship deals and opportunities outside the cage now, and her motivation may have waned a little bit from where it was when she was on her title run, when she was on the come up. And while I would agree with that, the expression rings true that it's hard to get up at 5 a.m. and do road work when you're sleeping in satin sheets. At the same time, Joanna seems to me like an extremely driven, an extremely committed, an extremely professional fighter that is a natural born fighter, has the heart of a lion, the desire to be the champion, and a strong will to win. Ultimately, Joanna's a cardio machine. She never slows down. She gets better as fights wear on. And you can't get that level of cardio and conditioning unless you're putting in serious dedication, serious work in the gym. And so, there could be a lot of speculation over Joanna's motivation at this stage in her career, but I don't feel that's reflected by her performances. Sure, she might not be as good as she used to be in her younger days, but Father Time's undefeated, you'd expect that. But in terms of her commitment to the sport, for me, she still brings it, man, every time we see her fight. And that's all you can ask for. What I would also add to that is that there is a lot of motivation for Joanna coming into this fight, because if we're being brutally honest, the winner of this fight is going to go on to fight Carla Esparza, who holds the title. And if Joanna fights Carla, it's going to be a massacre. Let's be realistic. Carla doesn't really stand any realistic chance of beating Joanna. If Joanna fights Carla, she could probably beat Carla with 2 hands tied behind her back and blindfolded. It's a cakewalk for Joanna. So if Joanna can just make it past Zhang, there is a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow waiting for her in the form of that strawweight title. And, that title is something that defined Joanna through majority of her career, right? She had a long title run. She called herself Joanna Champion, and she built her brand around being the champion. She hasn't been herself. She hasn't been as confident. She hasn't had that swag since she lost the title. If she can get past Zhang, she is in touching distance of that title. And with her being a very popular fighter, with her having a good relationship with Dana, with her being a company woman, you know that if she does get past Zhang, they will throw her into a title shot faster than you can say fucking Bryce Mitchell loves guns. They will throw her into that title shot, man. No doubt about it. Carla can reject it as long as she wants. We know that the UFC want Joanna as a champion. She's very marketable and has an exciting style of fighting. Win or lose, Joanna's always entertaining. So there's a lot of motivation for her coming into this fight. And something else that's quite interesting to me is that last week we saw Joanna Jedrzejczyk's training partner at American Top Team look absolutely phenomenal against Felice Herrig. I'm scrolling down trying to find a picture of the two of them. Her countrywoman, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, in my opinion, put in the best performance of her career against Felice Herrig. Now, a lot of people will be like, oh, Herrig's terrible. How can you say that? Herrig's a low-level fighter. It doesn't tell us anything that Karolina beat her, blah, 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 blah. I strongly disagree. Karolina has never moved that well. She's never had that much pop in her shots. She's never been as scrambly on the ground. And she never had that glow about her. There was a real glow, a real physicality, a real sharpness to everything she did. She's never had pop in her shots like that. Karolina looked outstanding. So even in her mid-30s, she put in the best performance of her career, in my opinion. I don't care what level you feel Felice is at. You can tell a lot about the way a fighter moves, about their skills, about their performance, irrespective of who their opponent is. And Karolina last week looked absolutely phenomenal. So that might not mean anything in the context of how Joanna's going to look this weekend, or it could mean a lot. I mean, what I would say is if these two girls have been training hard in the gym every day, iron sharpens iron, and if Karolina looked that good last week, who knows how good Joanna could look this week. It's unlikely she will improve at this stage in her career. She's more likely to kind of plateau, but I wouldn't rule it out. Someone like Joanna has the absolute heart of a lion, the championship spirit. If anyone can roll back the years, rejuvenate her career, and show up with improvements that will give her a better chance of winning this time, is Joanna. So one of the other ways that this fight has changed a lot is Zhang is obviously a lot more experienced now. She's felt the taste of defeat. She was undefeated coming into the first fight against Joanna, and since then has lost twice to Rose. She's got more experience going the distance in really hard competitive fights that she experienced against Namajunas and Jedrzejczyk, and so she'll understand how to pace herself better. She'll understand her body better, and now that she's got that experience of 5-round title fights, she's likely to have grown and improved, and will be a more difficult test for Joanna this time around, because remember, that was the first time that Zhang had ever fought in a 25-minute fight. So no surprises that she struggled a little bit at times with the her energy levels. It's not easy going 5 hard rounds with Joanna, not easy to sprint. Joanna fights at a very high pace, but we talked a little bit about that being Zhang's first 5-round fight here, and earlier in the breakdown we spoke about how this fight is very different from their first fight, and the main reason why this one is so different, is because this is a 3-round fight instead of a 5-round title fight. Obviously, when they first fought, it was for the strawweight title. That's 5 rounds, but this is just any old fight on the main card of a UFC pay-per-view. So it's 3 rounds, and this is an absolutely huge factor to take into consideration. It is an absolute game changer, because one of Weili Zhang's biggest weaknesses is that she does become very flat as fights wear on. for most human beings, for most athletes, there's always a trade-off, right? Sometimes you get these unicorns like a John Jones or a Kamaru Usman that can do it all. But for most athletes, there's always going to be a trade-off where if you want to excel in one thing, you open up weaknesses elsewhere. And Weili Zhang is by far the most powerful, physically imposing fighter in the strawweight division. She's got devastating knockout power, a real physicality to everything she does, and big power in her hands. But all that power and athleticism comes at a cost, because she does slow down very, very quickly in the fights. Early in matchups, you'll see her light on her feet, loads of head movement, bobbing and weaving. But very, very quickly in the fight, she becomes a lot more flat-footed. Her arms become heavy and drop lower, and her volume drops as she starts to become tired. And when these things happen, she doesn't score as many points because she's not letting her hands go as much, and obviously landing strikes on her opponent. And she also becomes a lot worse defensively and easier to hit because she's just more tired and sloppy, and she's not sharp enough to react to what her opponent is doing. And so the fact that this is a 3-round fight is an absolute game changer, because Weili Zhang's gas tank isn't going to be as much of an issue in this matchup, because her gas tank's not terrible. Even when she gets tired, she still hits hard and she's dangerous. But obviously with this being 3 rounds, she could pace herself much easier than if this were 5 rounds. We know Joanna is a fighter that tends to start slow and get better as fights wear on, whereas Zhang starts very fast and then slows down as fights wear on. So with this being a 3-round fight instead of a 5-round fight, it heavily favours Zhang. One of the main reasons why I bet Joanna Jedrzejczyk in their first fight was because I felt in the later rounds Joanna would be fresher and she'd be able to outwork Zhang when Zhang started to slow down. We don't have that element here, with there only being 3 rounds for Joanna to get the job done. So this is a far more difficult fight for Joanna this time around. So if we talk about how these two girls match up from a stylistic point of view, obviously they are primarily strikers, but Weili Zhang is more well-rounded, and we see her try to use grappling in some of her past fights, like against Rose and Tecia Torres. But if we're being brutally honest, Weili Zhang's grappling's pretty bad, and Rose did expose that in the last fight. Zhang's offensive wrestling isn't great. She's quite low level on the ground. She's very, very weak off her back. In my opinion, Joanna has the best takedown defense I've ever seen in the UFC. Phenomenal takedown defense, and if you are lucky enough to get her down, it's almost impossible to hold her down because she can immediately pop back up to her feet. Joanna Jedrzejczyk's takedown defense is incredible, and Weili Zhang just doesn't possess the technique, the strength, or the physicality to take Joanna down and hold her down. So a few people have been asking me this week, can Zhang use her grappling? No, she can't. I mean, she can, but it won't help her in this fight. If anything, I think using grappling would backfire on Zhang, and it would be a big mistake, because grappling uses up a lot of energy, right? If Zhang's going to try and come into this fight and grapple, she's going to burn through a lot of energy, because it isn't going to be easy to get Jedrzejczyk down, and if she gets her down, like I say, very difficult to hold her down. So if Zhang were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, she would likely burn through tons of energy, not achieve a lot because of how difficult it is to hold Joanna down, and as a result risk gassing out pretty quickly and not achieving a lot. At least when she gasses out on the feet, she's done a lot of damage, scored a lot of points, and landed a lot of power strikes. With her grappling, I don't see her having any success, so it would just be a waste of energy and likely make her an even less effective striker because of how much more tired she's going to be if she chooses to grapple. Now, in terms of striking, their first fight gave us a great window into how these two girls match up when it comes to striking. And I've got to be honest, I was really disappointed in Jedrzejczyk's approach to their first fight, because Jedrzejczyk has always been a counter striker that always threw a really diverse range of strikes, a high volume strikes, and had very good footwork, very good movement, very good defense. We saw her dance around Jessica Andrade all night, and Andrade didn't get near her. But for some strange reason, in that first fight against Zhang, Jedrzejczyk decided to stand right in front of Zhang and just trade big power shots and play rock'em sock'em robots, which makes absolutely no sense to me, because that is Zhang's biggest strength. Zhang's got more power than anyone in the division and an abundance of physicality. So Zhang's best chance of beating you is when you stand right in front of her and you bet on your chin and power against hers. We know her chin's great. We know she's very tough. We know she hits very hard. So meeting her head on isn't a very good idea. How do you beat Zhang? You wear her down. You slow her down. You look to frustrate her with speed and movement and make her miss so that her arms get tired. But Jedrzejczyk didn't do any of that early on. She went head to head, played Rock'em Sock'em Robots, got into a crazy brawl, and played into Zhang's strengths and into Zhang's hands. So I was really disappointed with Jedrzejczyk's strategy in their first fight. I was betting on Jedrzejczyk on the basis that she would counter-strike like she did against Andrade, but she didn't. And it was a very disappointing performance, in my opinion. Now, if she comes into this fight and counter-strikes, I think she'll do a lot better. If she chooses to stand in front of Zhang and trade, I see a similar outcome to last fight, where she takes a ton of damage, loses the majority of the exchanges, and eats some really, really big shots. I think if Joanna Jedrzejczyk wants to win this, she needs to stay light on her feet, get on her bike, circle away, play the role of Matador, and chip away at Zhang as she comes forward. But who knows if she's going to do that, because she didn't in her last fight against Zhang. Now, it would be great if we had a video clip of Joanna Jedrzejczyk telling us that she's going to counter-strike this time, just like we've got Taylor Santos telling us she's going to grapple. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any content like that. Please leave a comment below if you've got a link to a video where Jedrzejczyk talks about her strategy coming into this matchup. But if she fought like that against Zhang last time, you know, it's difficult for us to, you know, anticipate that she'll change her strategy this time, even though it would be the smart thing to do. All we could do is bet on, you know, things we've seen to give us the, you know, most, you know, best indicator of what is likely to happen in the future. And it would be a bit speculative of us to assume Jedrzejczyk would come in with a counter-striking style this time when she didn't last time. There has to be a reason why she felt she couldn't do that last time. So perhaps she'll take the same approach this time. So if the fight stays on the feet, I expect Zhang to win just like she did last time. I think with it only being a 3-round fight, Zhang will have, you know, far more success than she did last time, because she's not going to get tired, you know, as much as she did in a 5-round fight, and so she can go harder early, land those big power shots, inflict big damage on Jedrzejczyk and hurt her. But if Jedrzejczyk comes in with a counter-striking style, I do think Jedrzejczyk's got a really good chance of making Zhang miss, chipping away at her from the outside, and winning another close decision. What I will say about this fight is that no matter who wins, I think it's going to be razor close again. I really do think it's going to be razor close. I definitely lean Zhang in a 3-round fight. I think she's more likely to win. And because it's 3 rounds, I'm not going to be betting Jedrzejczyk this weekend. But I do think if you really want to bet this fight for action, if you do want to gamble on this fight, Jedrzejczyk does give you the better risk to reward ratio at underdog odds. I think this is a dog or pass matchup. There's no way I would be betting Zhang as a big favourite. I think that would be very foolish, especially when you look at how close their fight was before. You know, a lot of the time we're speculating and working with incomplete sets of information to work out which fighter is more likely to win. But we don't have that problem here because we've seen these two girls fight before. I don't see how you could bet Zhang this weekend knowing how close their first fight was. You know, if you look at Zhang's odds, 1.61 minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%, when their last fight was essentially a 50-50 fight. Even with this being a 3-round matchup this time, I don't see how you can cap Zhang at better than 62%. So for me, this one is you know, an easy pass on Zhang. If you really want to bet this fight, you've got to take the Boogie Woman, the former Joanna champion. And I hope you found that breakdown video useful. Please, if you did find it useful, I will remind you, hit the like button below. If this video gets 200 likes, we're going to be doing that over-unders video later on in the week. And also leave a comment. Let me know what your bets are this weekend. Let me know what you think of these breakdown videos. Call me a dick. Do whatever you want. Or please don't call me a dick. I am a little bit sensitive. But anyway, let's get into the next fight between Manel Kape and Rogerio Bontorin. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Manel Kape is the favourite at average odds of about 1.44, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on Rogerio Bontorin, he's about an average of 2.90, which is plus 190 for an implied probability of 34%. So Manel Kape is 28 years old, 5'5", with a 68-inch reach, and Rogerio Bontorin, 30 years old, 5'5", with a 67-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same size, roughly about the same age. No notable X factors that I can think of. So let's dig right into talking about how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view. And when you look at these two fighters, it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Manel Kape is the striker. He's going to want to keep the fight on the feet. Rogerio Bontorin, primarily a grappler, he's going to want to keep the fight on the ground. And so Bontorin will have an advantage on the ground. Kape will have an advantage on the feet. But this is a complex matchup with a lot of different layers and things for us to consider. So if the fight does stay on the feet, Kape will definitely have an advantage. He's faster, he's more technical, he hits a lot harder. And while I wouldn't say his advantages from a technical point of view are like massive over Bontorin, he definitely has an edge in all areas. He's faster, he's more powerful, he's better defensively, he moves better. The total package, Kape's better across the board when it comes to striking. But Kape is also a very, very frustrating fighter in that if you go back and watch his fights, at times you'll see long periods of inactivity. You know, in my live betting group every week and in all my breakdown videos, I talk about the importance of consistency and putting your stamp on rounds. You never want to leave it in the hands of the judges. You want to make sure that you're going out there, you're putting your stamp on rounds and leaving no doubt that you won that round. You don't want to be one of these guys that just kind of tries to chip away at your opponents or edge them and give the judges an opportunity to score a round wrong. Kape, in many of his fights and many of his rounds, is way too passive and doesn't do a good enough job of putting his stamp on rounds. At times he's aggressive and at times he'll go out there and really put it on his opponents, but all too often when you watch Kape, he just kind of point fights and edges his opponents and has long periods of inactivity in rounds, which makes them really inconclusive as to who won. So even though Kape does have a big advantage on the feet, I wouldn't be surprised if Bontorin makes rounds on the feet close if Kape shows up and performs very passively and tentatively like he does at times. And like I say, this is where it comes down to consistency. Kape's not always like that. In some fights he's really aggressive and his, style of fighting even changes a lot from round to round. In one round he could be tentative and passive, the next round very aggressive. But again, you've got to let the odds do the work for you and consider the odds on Kape. He is a 1.44 favourite, which carries an implied probability of 69%. You really, if you're going to bet Kape this weekend, you want there to be no major risk factors in this odds range, because you've got to give him a better than 69% chance of winning in order to find value, which is obviously a huge probability to give someone of winning. And so even though Kape does have an advantage on the feet, there's kind of nuances to it, which mean I can never feel that confident betting on a guy like Kape, particularly at big favourite odds, because I do feel that he is a bit inconsistent. Now, in terms of grappling, Rogerio Bontorin has an absolutely enormous advantage on the ground. Some people will tell me that Kape, someone in Kape's family is some kind of like wrestling champion or something somewhere, or some like high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner or some kind of judoka. I always get someone pop up and tell me this, but it's completely irrelevant to me. Ultimately, all I do is make decisions and form opinions based on what I actually see. Cold, hard, tangible evidence in the form of fight footage which shows me what a fighter is capable of. And based on Kape's past fights, his takedown defense is awful and his ground game is awful too. He's very, very weak off his back. Super low level ground game. So I don't know what credentials he's got, what grappling tournaments he won, what certificates he's got on the wall in his mum's house. MMA grappling, very, very bad. So Rogerio Bontorin is going to have a huge advantage on the ground in this fight. So at this point, you're probably thinking, well, Kape's got the advantage on the feet, but Bontorin's got a huge advantage on the ground, and he's a big underdog. We should probably be betting Bontorin this weekend, right? Not so much, man. Not so much. This fight is more complex than that, because Bontorin has a huge weakness that Kape is very likely to exploit. And this is probably the reason, or one of the main reasons, why Kape is such a big favourite in this fight. So Bontorin is one of these fighters that slows down a lot as fights wear on. But Bontorin's biggest problem is that the thing that gets him the most tired is actually grappling, which is his biggest strength. So Bontorin's in this impossible situation where his biggest strength, which is his grappling, also exposes his biggest weakness, which is his cardio. So he needs to grapple in order to win fights because he's not a very good striker, but the more he grapples, the more he gasses out. So he's in this really awkward situation where he's got this trade-off where he's always trying to manage his output because he knows he can't afford to go hard or he's going to burn himself out, which means he's not going to be able to grapple effectively anymore because he's going to be too tired to take his opponents down, and he's going to be a sitting duck on the feet. He's going to be too tired to defend himself. So it's tough to bet on guys like Bontorin because you know if at any point in this fight he runs into a tough time and has to exert a lot of energy to get himself out of trouble or impose himself on Kape, he's going to burn himself out and gas himself out very quickly. So that's why I still lean towards Kape in this fight, because Kape's takedown offense isn't good, his ground game's not good, and he's a little bit passive at times on the feet, but his gas tank's very good. He's really powerful, really athletic, and if he can make Bontorin work hard, Bontorin is likely to burn himself out, and then in the second half of this matchup be too tired to take Kape down and hold him down, and too tired to hang with Kape on the feet. But this fight gets really complicated because of how passive and inactive Kape is, and this is why this is such a difficult fight for betting, because like I say, in past fights Kape has been very passive and hasn't done a lot. His output has been very low. And if he performs like that against Bontorin, he's going to give Bontorin the opportunity to win because he may not have a high enough output to force Bontorin to work that hard, which means Bontorin isn't going to burn himself out like he has in past fights because Kape may allow him to fight at a more comfortable pace because of how passive and low volume Kape has in the past. So if both has fought in the past. So if both these guys show up and perform to their full potential, I think Kape wins a really high percentage of the time, which is why he's a big favourite. But I do feel Kape is inconsistent, and like I say, if he puts in a passive low volume performance, he's not going to expose Bontorin's biggest weakness, which is his gas tank, because Bontorin's gas tank is going to hold it better deeper into the fight. And if that happens, I think Kape could be playing with fire and a big risk of losing this one, because Bontorin may still have the energy deep in the fight to take Kape down and rack up a lot of top control on him, in that second half of round 2 and into round 3. So it's a very, very complex matchup. From a betting point of view, I would not touch Kape here. There's no way you could touch this guy at odds of 1.44 minus 227. Just a bad bet, dude. Straight up bad bet. Maybe he wins, maybe he doesn't, but it's very dangerous to bet inconsistent, passive fighters as big favourites because you never know when they're going to show up and fight for your money. So this is a dog or pass fight for me. If you really want to bet this fight, I would take Bontorin. However, I don't personally feel great about betting a fighter that has a bad gas tank, and I don't feel great about betting a fighter who I know is going to lose an extremely high percentage of the time if his opponent shows up and performs to his full potential. So Bontorin is not the kind of fighter that I would bet this weekend. I do think he gives you the better risk to reward ratio out of the two if you really want to bet this fight, but I would recommend that you pass. Obviously do your own research, but that is not a fight that I would be messing with. But a fight that I would be messing with is this one, because I think that Jack Della Maddalena is a really good bet this weekend for all the reasons that I will explain in this breakdown video. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Jack Della Maddalena is the favourite. Average odds of about 1.66, which is minus 152 for an implied probability of 60%. And Emeev is the underdog at average odds of about 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. So the odds on Maddalena at the moment carry an implied probability of about 60%. I think it's more than reasonable, in my opinion, to cap Maddalena in that 65 to 70% odds range, which give us a good margin of value over the bookies. And now let me explain why I think Maddalena is a good bet this weekend. So Maddalena, 25 years old, 5'11" with a 73-inch reach. Emeev, 35 years old, 5'10", with a 68.5-inch reach. So straight away, there are a couple of big X factors for us to dig into there. The first being the age. We can see that Maddalena is 10 years younger than Emeev, and like we said in the Glover versus Jiri breakdown, we know statistically the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. So again, if you were purely blind betting based on that statistic, knowing Maddalena's age gives him a 70% chance of winning. Blind betting that statistic, you're getting a 10% margin over the bookie, which straight away is not a bad reason to take a shot on Maddalena this weekend. On top of that, Emeev is a fighter with a lot of miles on the clock. He's had 25 pro fights, which is a lot of fights. And with Emeev, just like with Alexander Volkov last week, from very early on in his career, he's been fighting at a really high level. So if you look very early on in his career, he was fighting in M1 Challenge, M1 Global. And M1 Challenge or M1 Global was actually one of the biggest and best MMA promotions in the world back in like 2010, 2011. They were absolutely massive, a lot bigger than they are now. You know, at one point the UFC were talking about co-promoting a fight between Fedor Emelianenko and you know, a UFC fighter with M1, because Fedor was signed to M1 at the time, or he was like co-owner of M1, something like that. But yeah, they were a pretty major promotion back in like 2010, 2011. And so in M1, if you're fighting in M1, you fought a much higher level of opponent in that promotion than you would now. So very early into Emeev's career, he was facing a really good level of opponent. You know, there was no kind of squash matches, feeling out process for Emeev in his career. It was straight to the races. And obviously, when you're facing a higher level of opponent, you're going to be taking more damage, more injuries. You're going to be putting your body through more wear and tear. So, you know, even though Emeev's had 25 pro fights, which isn't a crazy amount of fights, not a huge amount of fights, it's a good amount of fights. But the majority of those 25 pro fights have been, you know, been against a level of opponent that can really, take quite a lot out of Emeev's body through damage and injuries. And on top of that, we can also see that Emeev has spent a lot of time in the octagon. His last 9 fights have gone to a decision, and obviously the longer you spend in the cage, in the octagon, fighting for real, the more damage, the more wear and tear you're going to put on your body. So Emeev, 35 years old, he's at that stage in his career where he's going to start to decline from fight to fight. You certainly wouldn't be expecting Emeev to show any improvements at this stage in his career. And not only is he getting old now, a lot of fights, a lot of miles on the clock within those fights. Whereas Maddalena, this young, hungry bull, he should be making big improvements from fight to fight at this stage in his career. So these two guys are definitely on opposite career trajectories. Maddalena's on the up and up, Emeev's on the down and down, and that obviously favours Maddalena. So now, let's talk about how these two guys match up from a technical point of view. Now, when you look at a guy like Emeev, with where he's from in the world, the fact that he's got a base in combat sambo, and you consider the guys from Dagestan and Chechnya, pretty fucking scary, right? When we think about combat sambo guys, really high-level fighters like Emeev and Makhachev and Khabib spring to mind. And, for the most part, it is very dangerous betting against fighters like this because they win a very high percentage of the time. But while most combat sambo guys are very aggressive and they have that crushing physicality to their grappling, like the Emeevs, the Khabibs, the Makhachevs, the Durayevs, every once in a while a combat sambo guy does pop up in the UFC, which isn't like that at all. Instead, these fighters focus on using their high level skill set for defense first, and we end up with more passive, conservative, tentative styles of fighters who struggle to put their stamp on rounds. And Emeev is a combat sambo guy like that. Other examples I can think of are Rustam Kabelov and Zubair Tukagov. Just combat sambo guys who don't have that crazy physicality, that crazy power, that amazing gas tank, and combat sambo guys who kind of just chip away and look to outpoint you rather than to, ragdoll you to the ground and overwhelm you like the higher level combat sambo guys we've mentioned a few times. And Emeev's record kind of reflects this, because if you look at Emeev's record in the UFC, dating back all the way to his debut against Sam Alvey. He's never finished anyone in the UFC, doesn't have a single finish. And this highlights that he just isn't that dangerous. He doesn't really have much power in his hands, doesn't have dangerous submissions, he doesn't have like crushing ground and pound or grappling control. Emeev is a guy that just kind of chips away at you and looks to outpoint you, but never really inflicts that much damage, and is one of these guys that really struggles to put his stamp on rounds. Again, this is reflected in his record. His last 2 fights have gone to a split decision. You see a majority decision here, and a reason why this guy has gone to split decisions, quite frequently, is because, again, he just doesn't let it go. He doesn't put his stamp on rounds. He holds back a lot, and instead of going out there, putting it on his opponent, putting in dominant rounds, putting in dominant performances, and leaving no question in the judges' minds that he's won a round, he will kind of point fight and just chip away and look to edge his opponents. And at times he achieves that goal and he'll win a decision, but quite often he will, really, due to his passive style of fighting, wind up in a situation where fights were way closer than they needed to be. And that is a huge issue with Emeev's overall style of fighting. He should have absolutely dominated David Zawada and Danny Roberts. From a technical point of view, Emeev is so much better than both Roberts and Zawada, but he almost lost both fights, and both of them went to a split decision because of his passiveness. His style just is not a style that judges like. He just doesn't do a lot. He doesn't go out there and win rounds beyond all reasonable doubt. And straight away, that's another reason to like Maddalena in this fight, because he is the complete opposite. He is polar opposites from Ramazan Emeev. Jack Della Maddalena is an absolute dog, and I mean that as the biggest compliment I could ever pay a fighter. He's got the heart of a lion, the spirit of a champion, an absolute warrior, and for every single second this guy is in the cage, he's trying to murder you. And it's as simple as that. There's no feeling out process with this guy. There's no range finding strikes. There's no point fighting. From the first second to the last, he's walking forward, trying to punch a hole in your head. And so when you've got 2 guys like this, someone that's a scrappy dog that's looking to get in your face and win every single second of this fight and take you out, and then you've got a guy who's kind of passive, doesn't want to engage that much, just kind of wants to dance around and chip away at you, it's very difficult for the point fighter like Emeev to overcome the aggression and pressure and physicality and power and nastiness of a guy like Maddalena, because the primary scoring factor in MMA is damage, right? Who's done the most damage, who's landed the biggest shots, who's hurt the opponent, who's put their biggest stamp on the round. And I just don't see, based on past performances, how Emeev is going to be able to do that. On the feet, there is no doubt that Maddalena has a big advantage here. He's a really good boxer, he's tough, he's got a good chin, he's aggressive, he's got big power, and he can fight at a very, very high pace without slowing down that much. When you look at a guy like Maddalena, they're always going to slow down a little bit because of how much intensity they fight with, how much they throw into every strike. But he doesn't slow down that much, and still very deep into fights. He's an absolute nightmare to deal with. If this fight stays standing, I just don't think Emeev is going to be able to deal with the power, the physicality, or the aggressiveness of Maddalena. I give this guy a pretty big advantage on the feet. But every bet has risk factors, and this bet is no different. I'm betting Maddalena this weekend, but the bet carries risk. Show me a bet which doesn't have significant risk factors, and I will show you a fight that you haven't researched properly. Last week, we broke down the fight between Lucas Almeida and Mike Trizano, and I identified, all kinds of risk factors in that fight for Trizano, and why at odds of 1.40 minus 250, Trizano probably wasn't a smart bet. And I had all kinds of guys in the comments telling me Trizano was a lock. He's going to win easily. He's going to smoke this guy. And I'm like, okay, man, we'll wait and see. And what happens? Trizano obviously struggled really, really bad. Even though a fighter might have a very good chance of winning, might have a high probability of winning, even if you feel very confident in them, if you can't identify serious, tangible weaknesses in a fighter, you probably haven't researched the fight correctly. Even these fighters who are some of the greatest of all time, you know, some of the best champions in our sport, like the Amanda Nunes's, like the Valentina Shevchenkos, they have weaknesses that can potentially be exploited, and this fight is no different. So, like I say, show me a bet without risk factors. I'll show you a bet you haven't researched properly, and there are risk factors with this bet. And the risk factor is obviously Emeev is a better grappler than Maddalena, and there's no way to kind of dress that up or sugarcoat it. If Emeev comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, Maddalena is probably in a lot of trouble. But it's a complex fight, and that the topic around grappling is very nuanced, so let me explain. Notice how I said if Emeev comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he is likely to do very well here and cause Maddalena problems. That is key, because Maddalena's takedown offense isn't bad, and he isn't very easy to hold down. Maddalena's got reasonably good takedown defense, and he's the kind of guy that if you do take him down, he immediately looks to pop back up to his feet. He's very strong, very scrambly, and he looks to explode back up. This is a big deal, because Emeev isn't a guy that ever uses grappling heavy game plans. Remember what we've said throughout this breakdown video. He's one of these guys that struggles to put his stamp on rounds. He doesn't have that crushing physicality to his style of fighting. So while from a technical point of view he's a far better grappler than Maddalena, what we usually see from Emeev is he'll take his opponents down, and then he'll immediately give them a ton of space on the ground as he postures up to land ground and pound, and he'll give his opponents enough space to pop back up to their feet. Emeev doesn't have that crushing physicality, that crushing grappling control that a Khabib or a Makhachev has. Usually when Emeev takes you down, his technique is really loosey-goosey, and for a big, strong, physically imposing guy like Maddalena that is immediately looking to scramble back up to his feet, Emeev usually gives guys like this more than enough space to pop back up, which is exactly what we saw in his last two fights, which both ended in a split decision. He would take Roberts and take Zawada down, but he wasn't able to hold them down for long enough to score a good amount of points on the judges' scorecards. So I've got no doubt that Emeev can take Maddalena down. Like I say, Maddalena's takedown offense isn't terrible, but it's not bulletproof either. When Emeev shoots and uses his grappling, he will get Maddalena down. But the question for me is, can Emeev spend enough time on the ground and score enough points to trump the amount of damage that Maddalena is going to do on the feet and the effective striking that Maddalena is going to do on the feet? From my perspective, with Emeev struggling to hold past opponents down, this fight is more than likely to spend a lot more time on the feet than it is on the ground, and on the feet we know Maddalena has a big advantage. And we've also got to talk about Emeev's fighting style. Remember what I said, if Emeev comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he's likely to cause Maddalena trouble. Using a little bit of grappling like he usually does is probably not going to be enough to cause Maddalena trouble, because he's not going to be able to keep Maddalena down long enough to score major points in this one, unless he really commits hard to his grappling and spams takedowns for 3 rounds. Emeev's never done that. That's not the type of fighter that Emeev is. So while it's possible he could come into this fight this weekend with a grappling heavy game plan, it's out of character. It's out of character for him. It's not something that he usually does. And you know, at 35 years old, 25 pro fights, can you teach an old dog new tricks? If Emeev has never used a grappling heavy game plan in the past, why would he choose to do it now? I mean, maybe he will. Maybe he's learned from his mistakes in the past and he's going to come out and be more aggressive and fight smarter this time. But it's far more likely he shows up and performs like he always does, you know, in his last 8 fights in the UFC. And I think if Emeev shows up and performs like he usually does, Maddalena wins a very high percentage of the time. So the major risk factor with this one is that Emeev looks different, uses more grappling than usual, and that's when he could cause Maddalena trouble. But if both these guys show up and perform like they usually do, I think Maddalena wins a really high percentage of the time, which is why I'm going to be betting him this weekend. And I think he's the best value bet on the card so far from everything that I've seen. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please hit the like button. If this video gets 200 likes, and we're banging out that over-under breakdown video on Friday night, take a look for that. Hopefully you're going to enjoy it when it drops. And leave a comment below. Give me some feedback on this video. Let me know what you thought. Let me know about your bets for this weekend. And don't forget to check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. We're the strongest MMA community in the world. You will learn a lot if you join this community, and you'll also get to watch breakdown videos for all my prelim fights on every single UFC card, as well as see all the bets that I place on every single UFC event. I think you'll like it a lot. You get to talk to me every day in the VIP chat room as well. And if you don't want to talk to me, talk to other guys in the community who are very, very knowledgeable when it comes to sports betting on MMA. Some really experienced gamblers in there that really know their stuff. So thank you very much for watching. Take care. Have a great weekend. Hope you win loads of money, and I will see you very, very soon. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.